Elizabeth Holmes, or more famously known as the founder of the multi-million-dollar company Theranos, got sued for committing one of the biggest frauds in recent times.
Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes has now officially been indicted on federal wire fraud charges. U.S. Attorney's Office accusing her.
Now, before I get into the story, I need to talk about blood drawing and blood testing in general.
From your blood, doctors can tell a lot about what's going on inside your body.
So usually, as we know, we go to a lab or to a doctor's office which has testing facilities, lab facilities, and that is where we get our blood test done. And let's say this scenario where a person has multiple health issues, they have to get multiple blood tests done over a period of time. Now, how is that possible? By taking multiple blood samples at multiple intervals.
So the different tests that are needed, and those bottles will be filled according to the request that the physician or the consultant has made.
So what Theranos was offering was groundbreaking technology where the patient just has to get the blood draw once and they get a large list of tests done at once. Now that sounds good, right?
Elizabeth Holmes, her mission is to allow blood testing at a fraction of Medicare costs, and made Holmes the world's youngest female self-made billionaire.
So now let's go back to the history and see where this all began. Elizabeth Holmes was born on February 3rd, 1984, and she did her schooling in St. John's School, which is in Houston. Elizabeth was always interested in computer programming and claims to have sold C++ compilers to Chinese universities while she was in college. That's pretty smart, right? And later she studied chemical engineering at Stanford University.
Think about where you want to leave your fingerprints and what kind of legacies.
So later at some point when she was working at the Genome Institute of Singapore, she was tested positive for SARS-CoV-1. And how did that happen? It's claimed to have come because of her collecting blood samples from patients' syringes. And due to this, she started developing a huge fear for needles and syringes. So using this fear of needles, she went on to start her own company later called Real Time Cures, which was based in California. And this was the same company which later got renamed as, we know, Theranos. So she had this idea of using very less blood samples for a large amount of tests, and she did reach out to her professors and many medical experts to back her idea of having to use less blood for more tests done. One of her older professors, Phyllis Gardner, even said, "I don't think your idea is going to work." And then eventually she got one of her deans from college, Channing Robertson, to help her out with this idea, and he went on to become the first board director at Theranos. Over a period of time, they even claimed to have invented a machine called the Edison. This was a machine which could take very less amount of blood and could give large amounts of test results.
And a prototype called the Theranos 1.0. Elizabeth enlisted engineers to design a new version called the Edison.
Replaces the need for people to have big vials of blood taken from their arm.
Coming aside from this idea, if you notice, Elizabeth Holmes has this authoritative personality with which she could convince many people. She was also backed by her somewhat baritone kind of voice, which also seemingly put her in a commanding kind of position.
Our work is in the belief that access to health information is a basic human right. We are the only lab company that is actually really focused on leading with transparency. Absolutely. I think the promise of technology is that we can make access to...
And one more thing to be noticed is that she was a big fan of Steve Jobs, and she did try copying his dressing style on multiple occasions.
Demos that are really great that I'd like to show you.
So the right to protect the health and well-being of every person, and they're all there because they're the best at what they do.
Okay, now let's go back to Theranos. Now, Elizabeth Holmes by 2004 was able to manage to raise $6 million as venture capital, and that amount became $92 million by the time it was 2010, and then that's not yet a staggering $400 million by the time it was 2014. And the whole company Theranos was valued at $9 billion by then. Now, one of the major reasons of this massive growth for Theranos was the board of directors included many illustrious and famous people. For example, was Mr. George Shultz, who was a former Secretary of State, and also many other people like them. Now, if these were not enough, even large companies like Walgreens, Cleveland Clinic, Capital Blue Cross, all these companies had come up to some sort of, at least some agreement with Theranos. Okay, now coming all the way out of this man right here, his name is John Carreyrou, and he works as a journalist at the Wall Street Journal. Now, he got tipped about suspicious activities happening at Theranos. Now, we have to understand one thing here. Now, when a company is growing so big, just by claiming to have groundbreaking technology, eventually the employees or someone in the staff of Theranos is going to be a whistleblower. That's when they find out that all these blood testing machines are all fake. So John Carreyrou just goes out full on and publishes articles and articles explaining and exposing Theranos and claiming all of this to be fraud, that they were just using normal blood testing machines and claiming that they had something groundbreaking. Now, Elizabeth did retaliate. How did she do that? Now, she did send out lawsuits not only to John Carreyrou but also to Wall Street Journal. Now, what did John do against that? He went on to write a non-fiction book, a completely detailed book about this. And the book was called Bad Blood: Secrets and Lies in a Silicon Valley Startup. And this became a bestseller.
And the lies got bigger and bigger, and eventually the lies got so big.
They still believe that she is anything but crazy.
Theranos ignored my questions for about 2 months, and then when it became clear that I was not going away, they waged a very aggressive counterattack.
But you will not believe, Elizabeth just went on to deny all of these claims. In one of her interviews, she even told this.
This is what happens when you work to change things, and first they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world.
Now, things got pretty serious, and CMS, which is the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, did some inspection in the Newark office of Theranos, and they did find a lot of discrepancies. So they sent out a warning letter against Theranos. But Elizabeth went on, just denying all of these facts. So eventually Elizabeth got banned for owning, operating, or directing any sort of blood testing service for the next 2 years.
U.S. regulators are banning Theranos CEO Elizabeth Holmes. Regulators say that Holmes will no longer be able to own or operate a medical lab for at least 2 years.
After this, everything started going downhill. Now, there were many lawsuits against Theranos for withholding medical information and for taking over $700 million from investors for a false product. Now, some lawsuits were closed and settled by Elizabeth, but then she lost her voting powers in Theranos. No, that's not it. She was also banned from having an officer position in any public company for the next 10 years and was also fined $500,000. Now, it's not over for Elizabeth, and Theranos. There are still many lawsuits against them pending at court. But then, because of the pandemic, the dates are just getting pushed. So that's where we stand today, and let's see where the future progresses.
You win by getting back up. That I would start this company over 10,000 times if I had to.